In this video, I'm going to walk you through the Messy watercolor brush set, what all the brushes do, and how to use them. So when you first download and install the brush set, it's split up into 8 different categories, and that's just because there's over 200 brushes in this, and it would be such a pain to have to scroll through 200 brushes over here. It would be a miserable experience. So I've got 8 different categories, so you can locate exactly what you need when you need it. So I'm going to take you through each of these categories, show you what they're used for, and how to use them. And Messy Extras, these are all kind of like bonus brushes. They're painting brushes, there's scatter brushes, and there's even some paper texture brushes in here too. So these are like finishing touches and painting brushes. The Tuesday Water Brush is one of my favorite painting brushes. This is what I use to paint in some of the details that are maybe too unique to grab a stamp to put in, and I still get really beautiful varied watercolor texture throughout it. And if you paint on top of something that's already been painted, you're going to get a wet on dry effect. So you'll see it poking through because of that transparency, mimicking real watercolor. And that is the Tuesday Water Brush. It also works pretty well as a lettering brush too. It's got a bit of streamline on it, so you'll get some nice, consistent, varied stroke weights. And with that streamline, it'll be easier to write nice and smoothly. Heading into Bloom and Bleed. Bloom and Bleed I created as a blender brush, so use this with your smudge brush and you'll get some really nice blooms and bleeds out of it. So you can just push the color in, you can push the color out, and you can get some nice, easy effects. Heading back into our painting brushes, I have the Soft Texture Water Brush. This one has a bit of a watery feel to it, and it's got a lot softer edges than you're going to find in the water brush. The Watery Water Brush is similar to this water brush, but it's going to be a lot softer. The Smooth Round painting brush is really good when you want a lot of control. Next up is the Puffy Wash. I love the Puffy Wash to add some texture to the background. So it behaves a little bit like a scatter brush, but you can do really soft textures where you need it. And if you press down, you can get some really large textures too. And you can even have really soft wash in the background wherever you need it. Puffy Wash is my go-to for that. The Watery Wash is a more dense brush. So this is going to have a lot of pigment, but it's still going to be pretty watery. So you can see those watery effects with this brush. Next up is the Simple Splatter. So this is for adding in our messy details. You can pop those in like that. And then if you need a lot of splatter, use the Lots of Splatter brush. You'll get much more dense splatter with that brush. The sketching pencil I use for outlining artwork. So it's a nice low streamline sketching brush. And then I have 4 watercolor paper texture patterns for you. I just recommend having your brush size to max, change your color to black, and then paint over your artwork. You can see we've got that nice paper texture. So that's paper texture number 1. These are all a little bit different in the tooth or the grain of the paper. So that's number 2, this is number 3, and then number 4 looks like this. So you can see the differences. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the rest of these categories are made up of stamp brushes, so they all behave similarly. In the washes, you'll find background washes, which I'll show you what that looks like. Because these are stamp brushes, you want to make sure you're stamping them in with your finger. Even though they're programmed at full opacity, if you use your stylus, it'll still add transparency to the brush, and obviously we don't want that. You want to be able to have full opacity so then you can reduce it if you want to later on. So just stamp it in with your finger, and then you can move and manipulate it with your stylus. So these ones are all background textures that I created, and then these ones are more watery washes, which can attach really well onto the contours of your different subjects to make it look like the water is bleeding off of your subject. So I'll give you an idea of what these look like. There's a lot of really nice ones, and they're all pretty different, so you've got a lot to choose from depending on what look you're going for. So these are your more transparent washes, and then these ones are more background ones, but they're locked into a square in case you need them for social media posts like Instagram. They can come in handy for that type of artwork. Okay, so that takes care of washes. Let's talk about blooms. So these were all created using wet on wet. I've created a bunch of different shapes for you, so depending on what you need, there's something for any instance. I've got a bunch of circles right here, just general textures, and then I've got some curves and some lines and splotches. So I'll give you an idea of what these look like. And once again, just make sure you're stamping them in with your finger. And you can see how that water really bleeds right into these. And here's just another example. All of these brushes were created at 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels at 300 dpi. So they're super high res. So they'll definitely be large enough for all common sized applications. All of the paint splatter stamps were created with paint dropped from up above. So you can get some nice different textures. There's different sizes, there's different splatter patterns. So there's a lot to choose from, and that really injects that messiness into your artwork. But if you're looking for something a little more energetic with your splatters, then the splashes is where it's at. And splashes contains 3 different types of splashes. Up here you'll find background splashes. So these are large background textures that have splash elements around them. And then I've also given you some blown drip textures. So these can go on the edges of things to create that energy. And then the rest of these are splashes. So these are high energy, like paint flicking splatters. So that's what I've gotten here. Let me show you a couple more. And then into soft stains. Soft stains are when you have a hard edge of color and then it transitions into no color. So I've got a bunch of different shapes for you that you can move, manipulate. I like warping these a lot when I need them to fit in just the right area, and it can really add a lot of personality to the edge of a shape. You can also use these as water stains and combine them with those transparent washes. I like doing that as well. So there's a lot to choose from. And then finally, our last 2 categories are shapes 1 and shapes 2. In shapes 1, you'll find watercolor textures that are in all of your traditional shapes. So I've got circles, a bunch of different circles, rectangles, lines, angles, and curves. So that's what you'll find, and there's a lot of them in here. There's 53 in shapes 1, so you'll definitely find something that you'll be able to use here. So just giving you an idea of what these shapes look like. Some of them are more dry textures, some of them are kind of a mixture, other ones are more wet textures. So you'll be able to find something that fits whatever you're going for. Here's another one. This one's a line. I use this one for petals and it works really well. Let me show you an example of a dry brush one. So you can see we've got a lot of nice different shape textures, all different types and densities of paint. Okay, and then shapes 2, since shapes 1 took care of all of our typical traditional shapes, shapes 2 is all abstract shapes. So if you're working on a subject where a traditional shape won't quite work, then head into shapes 2 and you'll find what you need. So by abstract, I'll give you some examples. So that would be an abstract shape. A lot of these work really nice for animals. There's a lot of nice like wing shapes and fin shapes. Even like this one I use for fur. You can see it ends in a dry brush but starts as wet, so we've got some really nice variation in texture and density there. So that's a quick overview of the full messy watercolor brush set for Procreate.